LPGA tour had Caitlin Clark play, and the LPGA, fans, the event was taken over by the ominous crowd.
The LPGA just pulled off something the WNBA refuses to do, and it's sending shockwaves across women's sports, because when Caitlin Clark showed up to a golf event, the entire atmosphere exploded into chaos and excitement. Fans stormed the course just to see her every move. The LPGA instantly embraced her star power and celebrated what she brought to the game. But here's the twist. While golf welcomed her like a hero, the WNBA's reaction has been the complete opposite. Cold, defensive, even hostile. And it raises one burning question that could change everything. Is Caitlin Clark the solution women's sports need? Or has her meteoric rise exposed a hidden jealousy tearing the WNBA apart from the inside?
That made sure to go get angry at everything Caitlin Clark did and everything Caitlin Clark does and was ever going to do, and made it that she was the problem and not the solution.
When Caitlin Clark stepped onto that LPGA stage, it wasn't just about golf. It was about the kind of star power that can drag an entire sport into the spotlight overnight, and the LPGA knew it. They saw instantly what the WNBA keeps fighting against. The sheer gravity of Caitlin's influence. Fans didn't just show up, they flooded the event. Parents brought kids who had never cared about golf before. Entire families came out just to be part of the buzz. And suddenly, the atmosphere felt less like a quiet golf tournament and more like a rock concert. The LPGA understood that Caitlin wasn't just an athlete, she was a magnet. She was an entry point for millions of new eyeballs. And instead of resisting it, they leaned all the way in. They marketed her, they promoted her, and they celebrated her every move. And what happened? Ticket sales spiked, broadcast numbers jumped, and the headlines wrote themselves. Caitlin Clark turned a standard golf event into a cultural moment, proving in real time how powerful crossover appeal can be for women's sports.
The LPGA, you can see when it came to them that they were happy that Caitlin Clark was there. They knew exactly the value that Caitlin Clark brought.
But here's where things take a sharp turn. Because while the LPGA threw open the doors and welcomed Caitlin Clark like the future of women's sports, the WNBA acted like she was an intruder in her own house. Instead of celebrating the attention she brought, whispers started spreading that she was stealing the spotlight, that her fans were too loud, too new, too disruptive, and that energy quickly shifted from curiosity to hostility. It wasn't about growing the game anymore. It was about protecting egos. Players and even some league voices made it clear they weren't thrilled about her rise. And suddenly, Caitlin wasn't being treated like an ally. She was being painted like a threat. The message was subtle but obvious. We don't need you. We were fine before you came. Your fans aren't real fans, and your success doesn't belong here. And the irony is stunning, because at the exact same moment, golf was riding the Caitlin wave to new levels of exposure. The WNBA was busy pushing back, trying to control a spotlight that could have lifted them all. And in doing so, they may have exposed a deep insecurity that's been brewing beneath the surface for years.
Through the whole event, they saw how important it was that new fans were getting involved in golf, especially women's golf.
And the proof is right there in the crowd reactions, because when Caitlin Clark showed up to that LPGA event, the energy was electric. People weren't just watching golf, they were standing, cheering, chanting her name like it was March Madness all over again. Fans came hours early just to catch her warm up and then stayed long after the final putt, desperate for a glimpse, an autograph, a photo. This wasn't a normal golf audience. It was a brand new wave of supporters pouring into a sport they never cared about before. And the players noticed it too. Stars like Nelly Korda openly praised Clark, calling her a breath of fresh air, admitting she brought excitement the sport hadn't seen in years. The LPGA players understood immediately that Caitlin wasn't a rival, she was an amplifier. She expanded the stage for everyone involved, and the league itself leaned into that narrative, framing her appearance as a win not just for golf, but for women's sports in general. And that contrast with the WNBA's defensive stance couldn't be more striking. One league opened its arms and saw growth overnight. The other crossed its arms and risked alienating the very fans it desperately needs.
Because we know in the WNBA, when it came to Caitlin Clark, it was a lot of like, we don't need you and we were good before and we don't like your fans and this, that, and...
What makes this even more shocking is the mindset behind it. Because the LPGA never once asked where these fans were coming from or whether they were true golf diehards. They didn't care. All they saw was growth, opportunity, and energy. But in the WNBA, the conversation sounded completely different. It was about who gets the spotlight, who gets the credit, and who deserves the attention. And instead of recognizing that Caitlin Clark could be the bridge to an even bigger audience, the league treated her like a distraction from their established stars. Some players even complained that the hype around Clark took away from the progress they had already built, and in that attitude lies the real problem, because instead of building together, it created a divide. The LPGA saw Clark as a rising tide that could lift all boats. The WNBA saw her as a wave threatening to knock theirs over, and that defensive approach might be costing them dearly. Because sports today aren't about keeping things exclusive, they're about capturing moments, telling stories, and giving fans something to believe in. And right now, Caitlin Clark is that story. She is that moment. And the WNBA's refusal to fully embrace her might be the biggest missed opportunity in the history of the league.
They did everything they could to sabotage their own league. And yeah, it backfired. For me anyway, I think it's hard to argue that it didn't completely backfire for them because Caitlin Clark is more popular than ever.
And you can see the fallout building in real time because while the LPGA gained headlines for innovation and growth, the WNBA found itself trending for all the wrong reasons. Fans started calling out the league on social media, pointing to the stark difference in how golf embraced Clark compared to basketball pushing her away. Memes spread, highlight reels went viral, and the narrative quickly shifted from excitement to criticism. Instead of owning the moment and capitalizing on the fresh wave of attention, the WNBA looked like it was sabotaging its own product. And the irony is painful because Clark has never claimed she wanted to overshadow anyone. She has always talked about respecting veterans, about promoting women's sports as a whole, about lifting everyone with her platform, but the way the league responded created tension that didn't need to exist. Suddenly, it felt less like women's basketball versus the world and more like women's basketball versus itself. And in an era where unity is everything, that fracture could cost them dearly because if fans feel unwelcome or pushed away, they won't stick around. And the LPGA just proved that there's a whole universe of new supporters ready to embrace a league if the league itself is willing to embrace them back. The bigger danger here is what happens next, because the WNBA's defensive stance isn't just about Caitlin Clark. It's about the message it sends to every potential new fan, every young athlete, and every sponsor watching from the outside. If the league looks unwelcoming to the very star who could supercharge their visibility, what does that say to others who might want to invest or tune in? The LPGA showed vision by embracing Clark. They saw the future and leaned into it. The WNBA, by contrast, looks stuck in the past, clinging to an old mentality that protecting territory matters more than expanding it. But in today's sports landscape, that's a recipe for stagnation. Fans want collaboration. They want crossover moments. They want the feeling that women's sports are unified, not fractured. And Clark represents that opportunity better than anyone else. Ignoring her popularity doesn't make it go away. It only risks pushing it toward other leagues who are eager to seize it. And if that happens, the WNBA could end up sidelining itself in a battle it should be winning, not losing. And the craziest part is, Caitlin Clark herself isn't playing this as a rivalry. She has gone out of her way to show respect to WNBA legends. She's praised the league in interviews. She's talked about wanting to grow the game for everyone, yet instead of using that goodwill, the league has built walls around her. And that's where the danger really lies, because Clark's fan base is massive, passionate, and fiercely loyal. If the WNBA makes those fans feel unwanted, they won't just walk away quietly. They'll take their energy, their money, and their attention somewhere else. And leagues like the LPGA are more than happy to welcome them in. That's how you lose cultural momentum. Not because your product isn't good, but because your mindset refuses to evolve. Sports today are about stars who can transcend boundaries, and Clark is one of the rare athletes who can do that. She bridges basketball, golf, and even mainstream pop culture. She's not a threat to the WNBA. She's the bridge to a bigger future, but if the league doesn't realize that soon, it risks turning one of its greatest opportunities into one of its biggest regrets. The contrast between these two leagues is a masterclass in vision, because the LPGA looked at Caitlin Clark and saw growth, saw headlines, saw opportunity, while the WNBA looked at the exact same athlete and saw a threat. And that decision might define the trajectory of women's sports for years to come. Imagine if every league followed golf's example. Imagine if instead of competing for scraps, women's sports embraced crossover stars who bring new fans into the ecosystem. It would be a rising tide lifting everyone. But the WNBA seems more interested in guarding the spotlight than expanding it. And that short-sightedness could prove costly because fans are paying attention, sponsors are paying attention, and the media is already framing the narrative. One league looks open, forward-thinking, and united. The other looks divided, defensive, and insecure. And in the battle for cultural relevance, the perception is everything. Caitlin Clark has given women's sports a golden moment. The only question is which leagues will seize it and which ones will waste it. At the end of the day, this isn't just about Caitlin Clark playing golf or basketball. It's about a spotlight big enough to transform women's sports and the different ways leagues choose to handle it. The LPGA embraced the moment and grew stronger. The WNBA resisted it and exposed cracks in its foundation. And the lesson couldn't be clearer. Fans don't care about protecting egos. They care about energy, excitement, and unity. Clark represents all of that and more. She's not just an athlete, she's a movement, a cultural force capable of dragging entire sports into the mainstream. And if the WNBA can't see that, if they keep pushing her away instead of pulling her closer, they may one day look back and realize they let their greatest opportunity slip right through their fingers, because in the new era of sports, the leagues that adapt will rise and the ones that resist will be left behind. And right now, Caitlin Clark is the dividing line between the two.